Hi there, I'm Anthony Key and I'm the author of the Chronicles of Teng and its sequel Only Human. Today I'm going to try something different. Now, I know I only wrote these books primarily to be read, but I know also that there are people out there who prefer to just listen to audiobooks. So I thought I'd give you the best of both worlds. And today I'm going to begin to read to you the Chronicles of Teng, which I will continue to read week by week. For those of you who don't know, this is an action-adventure story with historical, cultural and moral themes running throughout. Our protagonists, Edgar Blake and his two companions, Susan Carter and Leo Porter, are lured into Chinese-occupied Tibet, where they come across a revelation in the form of a secret that has been waiting for 14,000 years to be revealed to the world. Our party soon find themselves caught up in a web of intrigue and deceit, not knowing who they can trust, with Chinese, Russian and American agents trying to outdo each other in a bid to obtain for themselves what the trio have uncovered. Beliefs and faiths are lost and found, and their quest also begins to question their friendship, courage and sanity. Okay, after that rather lengthy intro, let's begin the story. The Chronicles of Teng, Chapter 1, A Foreign Land. To some, a journey into the unknown could be considered reckless and foolhardy, yet to others an adventure. Had he known then what he now knew, would he have answered that late evening knock at his door? Professor Edgar Blake had never felt so tired, cold and wet as he did now. Yes, he'd been on many an expedition, but these were generally in warmer climates. Here, the relentless onslaught of hailstone fueled by strong winds had become merciless, and to those unlucky enough to be caught out in it, unbearable. Taking refuge in a derelict hut, Edgar Blake and his weary companions huddled together. All cold and wet, they looked idly on at the sheet of hailstone that was driving through the remnants of the old corrugated tin roof. A trickle of water worked its way down the contours of Blake's tired face. It stopped at his stubbly chin and formed into a pearl droplet, then dripped between his knees into a puddle on the floor. "Well, another fine mess you've got me into," he muttered to himself, his voice being drowned out by the deafening drum of hailstone on tin. It was 4 days ago they entered this strange foreign land. Then it had been a calm, quiet evening. A clear, starry sky, like a black velvet sequin curtain, hung overhead. The cold, dark serenity of the land was about to be broken. Cutting through the darkness, two distant beams of light preceded the labouring drone of a tired engine, an engine that was crying out in protest at having been driven so long and so hard. The vehicle, a solitary four-wheeled drive Land Cruiser, made its way along the Friendship Highway from Kathmandu, Nepal to Lhasa, Tibet, a long arduous journey of some 920 kilometres. They were now in Tibet, or the Tibetan Autonomous Region, renamed after the Chinese occupation in the 50s. Still bearing its scars of those dark days, it is still a magical land of untold beauty, myths, legends and secrets. On board the vehicle were Professor Edgar Blake, an archaeologist, and his two companions, Susan Carter, a linguist, and Leo Porter, a museum curator. The drivers, Wong and Sue, owned the Land Cruiser, renting it and themselves out for a living. Wong, a large Chinese man, turned around, or at least his head did, his body being too big to turn within the small confines of the driving seat. "We stop now, eh?" shouted Wong over the drone of the engine. Blake heartily agreed. In fact, they would have welcomed the stop some 20 kilometres earlier had it been called. "Wong, the road!" shouted Leo, pointing to the windscreen, irritated at the way Wong seemed to drive without looking ahead. The Land Cruiser pulled off the road and was now riding over rough, stony ground. A few minutes later, they were at the top of a small ravine. Grass could now be seen, with two deep furrows cutting through the surface. Driving slowly, Wong made for the furrows, which turned out to be deep tyre marks made in the rain on one of their previous journeys. The vehicle zigzagged down the slope until it reached the bottom. They all got out, breathing a sigh of relief and stretching and rubbing their aching limbs. This was their camp, a site well hidden from the road and robbers. It was much used by Wong and Sue on their trips to and from Nepal. Working within the spotlight's broad beams that shone from the top of the Land Cruiser, Wong and Sue set about the ritual of making camp, as they had done so many times before. Wong was Chinese, his parents moving from China to Tibet when he was a baby. Sue was a Tibetan pureblood and proud of it, since a lot of Tibetan population were now Chinese Tibetan, having crossbred since the 50s. The Mao government at that time helped and encouraged this practice by the relocation of thousands of families from the People's Republic of China to Tibet. Short and stocky, Sue was of typical build, coming from a long line of Tibetan farmers. However, in some parts of Tibet, the height of the males could be over 7 foot tall. It was from these giants that the ex-Dalai Lama recruited his police force. Blake watched Wong and Sue working as a team. They were efficient and methodical, obviously more than capable of setting up camp. But out of politeness, Blake offered to help, along with Leo. Sue wouldn't have any of it. "You pay for our service, please let us serve," he politely insisted, with a smile. If the truth be known, extra hands in this case would not have made light works. The tents had been designed and made by Sue for the harsh Tibetan terrain, and quite unlike anything Blake had experienced before. Leo raised a water canister to his mouth. "It would have been nice to have been asked first, before volunteering me out," he said to Blake, taking a large gulp. "What would you have said?" asked Blake. Leo pulled his thick coat from the back seat of the cruiser and slid it on. "Dunno, but Sue's right. We are paying for his service, so let him serve. Right, Susan?" said Leo, looking over towards her for support, but none came. Leo was stood on the running board of the Land Cruiser and about to jump off. "Do you want to lift down off there, Leo?" asked Blake teasingly. "Ha ha, very funny," replied Leo, not at all amused. Leo was short and chubby, portly, as he described himself. He'd been the focus of many a joke by Blake, and didn't mind as long as it didn't go too far. Balding, he now has substituted his loss of hair for a short beard, which he treats with reverence. "Ed, you are mean," said Susan, a little embarrassed for Leo. "He knows I'm only joking," said Blake. "Besides, he gives as good as he takes." He wasn't wrong, for Leo took great pleasure in reminding Blake of his previous, fruitless archaeological ventures. Blake was jotting down notes in his diary of the day's events. "This time tomorrow we should be in Lhasa," he said. "Aren't you glad we're travelling by road instead of flying? Just think, we would have missed all this beautiful landscape and scenery if we'd flown straight into Gongor Airport." "Oh yes, and don't forget sore backsides and backache. Oh, and then there's those beautiful potholes. Wouldn't miss them for anything," said Leo sarcastically. "Well, Wong made sure we didn't. I don't think he's missed one the whole trip," said Susan, laughing. Blake had to agree with her. Even Leo, seeing the funny side of it, managed to smile. Susan slid her hair bobble off and shook her hair loose. Looking over at Blake, her eyes met his, and for a few moments they exchanged affectionate glances. Or at least that's what Susan hoped they were. Blake broke eye contact with her and looked back down at his diary. She gazed up at the night sky. Daytime certainly did not have sole rights to spectacular views. The cold, pure, rarefied air of Tibet was instrumental in providing unsullied views of the multitude of stars that shone above, forming constellation after constellation. "Hey Ed, how did you arrange the visa so quickly?" asked Leo. The trip had been hastily put together due to Blake's unexplainable sense of urgency. He was a seasoned traveller and was used to arranging travel documents. However, this time was a little different. He was dealing with the Chinese authorities, and they were notoriously meticulous in their handling of official matters, especially passports and visas. Hey, you know the Chinese embassy prefer group bookings by travel agents and with tourist guides, said Blake. I suppose groups are easier to keep track of. They don't want any stray sheep, do they? Well, thank you for that snippet of information. I'm sure it'll come in very handy. But you still haven't answered my question, said Leo suspiciously. Sorry, Leo, said Blake, getting sidetracked again. Anyway, it is handy when you have a friend who works at the embassy. He said we could pass as a small group. He did all the paperwork for us, pulled a few strings, cut a few corners. You know what I mean. I knew it. We're here illegally, aren't we, said Leo. Of course. How else? Said Blake, trying not to laugh. Oh, that's just great, voiced Leo. Thought you'd have learned your lesson after last. He's only joking, Leo, interrupted Susan. She ran her fingers through her hair. Boy, does this head need washing. They leisurely walked up, away from the Land Cruiser, across a moonlit grassy clearing, and up an elevated mound, more like a hill. Susan stopped in her tracks and stood gazing up at the night sky. Not go too far, shouted Sue in broken English. Leo fumbled with his pocket torch. How do you switch this damn thing on? The end. Press the end, said Susan, covering her eyes when it shone into her face. You men, what would you do without us women? Probably go blind, said Leo without thinking. Blake gave him a behave yourself tap on the back of the head. You know, thinking about it, travelling to Lassa by road is like using the back door. It should attract less attention than by air straight into Lassa Airport, don't you think? He reasoned. I suppose so, said Leo. But why are we going in the back door? We're not doing anything illegal. No, we're not, said Blake. But the less the Chinese know about us, the better. Maybe, but I've got a funny feeling about this trip. What are you hoping to find anyway? Shangri-La? Or that long-lost race of globe-trotting builders you keep writing about, said Leo. Blake shrugged his shoulders and gave Leo a half-smile. If only, eh? One of Blake's more controversial theories suggests that thousands of years ago there was a race of people vastly superior both intellectually and technologically than the rest of the world at that time. They were great mathematicians who studied astronomy and built huge structures. They travelled the world, passing on all their knowledge to each and every culture they came in contact with. These different cultures, with their different religions, embraced this newfound knowledge and put it to good use in their religious beliefs. Leo was a little more puzzled than Blake's eagerness to just drop everything he was working on. Even more puzzled at himself for allowing Blake to con him into travelling halfway around the world. And for what? Even Blake himself didn't seem to know. Leo had been on a few of Blake's archaeological ventures when holidays permitted. But this time it was different. No months of planning and preparing, no research, and neither of them knew what lay ahead. 2 days on the road were starting to take its toll on Blake and his party, both mentally and physically. They slowly worked their way up an incline, weary but thankful that they were at last able to walk around after being sat down for so many hours. At this high altitude, even the smallest physical effort could leave you breathless. Another advantage, although they didn't know it at the time, for taking this longer route and slower route to Tibet, was that the body had time to gradually acclimatise to the altitude. Upon reaching the top of a small hill, a bitterly cold wind greeted them. Leo mumbled to himself, zipped up his coat and slid his gloves on. Why on earth did I let you talked me into coming into this wild goose chase of yours in this godforsaken wilderness?" His voice echoed down the valley and vanished into the night. Blake laughed. "Hey, what's up, Leo? Missing life in the big city?" Leo remained silent. If the truth be known, it was a pleasant change to be out of the rat race, but he wasn't about to admit that to Blake, since he took great pleasure in winding Blake up. The rhythmic hammering of Wong and Sue as they finished erecting the tents echoed a whispered end to the noise that so rudely awakened sleeping mountains and brought discord to the quiet of the night. Blake looked on into the darkness of the valley. "Must be quite a view in the daylight. I'll take some footage tomorrow." "Yes, and I'll take some photos," said Susan. "You know, Ed," said Leo in a disgruntled voice, "I could be sat at home now in my favourite chair with a glass of brandy and listening to my favourite composer, Brahms. Yes, with the thought of another humdrum day at the museum. Anyway, just treat this as an all-expenses paid holiday," smiled Blake. "Oh, that reminds me, I forgot my suntan lotion and shorts," Leo said jokingly. "Well, you might be joking, but actually you're right. There's more ultraviolet up here with the air being so rarefied, and you can get sunburned even though it's bitter cold," informed Blake. They turned around and started back down the hill. Sue was now working his way up towards them, carrying a gas lamp to assist in their descent back down the hill, which was now somewhat slower, the moon having had vanished behind a cloud formation. "Careful, Leo, it's a bit trickier than when you came up, especially in the dark," said Blake, knowing that Leo wasn't the most vigilant person on his feet, and who was at times clumsy and could trip over his own feet. Blake had joked on more than one occasion. Susan held on to Blake's shoulder for support. "Hey Ed, you said you were going to show us the original letter." Blake stopped abruptly and swung around. "Shh," he motioned. Susan had forgotten about Sue. Realising her indiscretion, she quickly changed the subject. "I'm starving, I could eat a yak." At this they all burst out laughing, even Sue. The evening meal was chicken stew prepared by Sue. At least that's what he said it was. The least one knew about the contents of Sue's cooking, the better. He could rustle up a meal out of anything, and did. All felt better now, with something warm inside their stomachs. Even Leo. "Care for a nightcap, anyone?" asked Leo, reaching inside his thick quilted coat and bringing out a hip flask of brandy. "You sly old fox," sneered Blake. "Hey, less of the old," Leo muttered as he passed the flask around. "You don't think I'm going to give up all my own comforts, do you?" "I suppose you brought those horrible things along as well," remarked Blake. "Horrible things?" puzzled Susan. "Yeah, 2 cigars he brings along on our little trips, just in case there's something worth celebrating. A waste of time. I don't even smoke. Probably why we've never found anything. The trips have been jinxed from the start," remarked Blake. The small hip flask was passed from hand to hand and was soon empty. "Well, I think we'd best turn in," suggested Blake. "It's getting late." Saying their good nights to Wong and Sue, they retired to their shared tent. And once inside, Leo wriggled into his warm sleeping bag. "Ah, come here, my lovely pillow," he sighed. Before we turn in, I've got something to show you," Blake said, reaching into his backpack. "I thought you said we best turn in," yawned Leo. "Ed, I'm sorry about the letter," apologised Susan. "I wasn't—" Blake interrupted her. "It's okay. I don't think Sue heard. I just think that the fewer the people that know about this letter and the statue, the better, since we don't really know what we're on to yet, do we?" Out of the backpack, Blake pulled out an old leather pouch bound at the top with cord. Leo, now curious, turned up the gas lamp, which was close by him. Undoing the pouch, Blake reached in and pulled out a small cardboard tube. He flipped off the end cap. A shiny scroll slid out, and he carefully slipped off the retaining band, and immediately the scroll sprung out into a perfectly flat sheet, which he put on the small camp table. What's that? Asked Leo, as he wriggled out of his sleeping bag and crawled over to the table. The original letter that you and Susan haven't seen, replied Blake, struggling to contain his excitement, even having seen it so many times before. All three sat around the small table looking at the shiny letter. Leo took hold of it and held it up to the gas lamp. So this is it. Looks like aluminium tin foil, said Leo, running his fingers over the contours of the strange lettering. Susan drew in close to the table. Time to tell the world, she uttered in a deep melodramatic voice. She was a woman of many talents, any one of which could have had career possibilities. She chose to become a linguist as a means of earning a living. However, cryptology, deciphering ancient texts, was also another passion of hers, which Blake thought was her true forte. Susan translated a copy of it for me. It's in an old form of Tibetan that isn't used anymore from a lama called Teng. He must be of high rank. There's his seal, pointed Blake. Susan's first glimpse of the letter reminded her of the copperplate etchings she used to do in her student days. So what's it all say? Asked Leo. Susan glanced over at Blake and then back down at the letter. Well, that's just it. Time to tell the world, she said. Oh, and where to find him. Intriguing, isn't it, Leo? All a bit theatrical, I'd say. Maybe even a practical joke. That's my Leo. Cynical as ever, said Blake. Look, see the writing on the letter. Notice how it's more like etching or engraving. Leo gently ran his fingers over the contours of the words and nodded in agreement. Now you're going to love this, continued Blake. Using your thumbnail, erase all the writing. No, cried Susan anxiously. She was passionate about her work, and destroying any piece of calligraphy was tantamount to sacrilege. It's all right, trust me, I know what I'm doing, said Blake confidently. Leo obliged and rubbed at the words until none were left. Now what? He asked. Just be patient. Wait a minute, urged Blake. Look, it's coming back, voiced Susan, a relieved smile appearing on her face. Leo raised an eyebrow and looked at Blake. Clever trick. You think that was good? Just watch this, said Blake. He then erased the lettering again, took hold of the letter and screwed it up into a ball. The letter, now the size of a golf ball, was placed on the table. All we need now is a Christmas tree, said Leo. A Christmas tree? Queried Susan. Yeah, my mum used to collect tin foil from sandwiches and make balls like this to hang on our Christmas tree. She'd collect for months, made all our decorations when Dad was out of work and we had no money, said Leo, picking up the ball and tossing it up and down in the palm of his hand. Leo's nostalgic thoughts were interrupted when Blake caught the ball in mid-flight and placed it back on the table. Watch closely and don't touch, he said, giving Leo a stern look. Sorry, said Leo sheepishly, glancing over at Susan. All three sat in silence for a few moments, looking at the ball, then at each other in turn. Well, voiced Leo impatiently. Blake silently smiled at Leo and just looked back down at the table. A further long, silent minute, an eternity. Then the ball rustled and moved. Leo and Susan looked on. Rolling to one side, then the other, the ball sprung to life. It opened out, returning to its original smooth, flat shape, without a crease or crinkle line in sight. Only the writing broke the otherwise smooth, shiny surface. It had once again returned to its original state. "So what do you think of that then, Leo?" asked Blake. Leo never answered. "Come on, Leo, admit it, even you've got to be impressed by that," voiced Susan. Before Leo could answer, Blake produced a pair of scissors. "Now for my next trick," announced Blake. "Take these scissors, Susan, and make a large cut in the letter, but don't cut it in half." She obliged, and then she placed the damaged letter on the table. For a moment nothing happened, but then the scissor cut in the letter, about 3 inches long, started to meld and fuse itself back together again. No visible signs of any cut whatsoever being left behind. Blake was now definitely feeling smug with himself. Leo, speechless again. Blake's moment was short-lived. "Tell you what," said Leo, "if I could market that I'd make a fortune." "Leo," said Susan sharply, "there's more to life than money, you know." "Quite right," agreed Blake. "I've had the letter tested in a laboratory, and like you, I thought it was aluminium tin foil, but it isn't. It's an unusual kind of silicon alloy with a couple of unknown elements present that they can't identify, and it's resistant to heat." Blake put his hand back inside the pouch. "What now, a rabbit?" asked Leo. "No, not quite," Blake said, unravelling the object that was well wrapped in cloth. "Oh, it's beautiful," said Susan, catching sight of it. Leo's eyes lit up and he edged closer, instinctively reaching out for it. Blake placed a golden statue on the table. Inlaid with bright red, green and blue gems, it stood some 6 inches tall, shimmering in the half-light of the gas lamp. "Egyptian?" asked Susan, glancing up at Blake. "No, that's what I first thought. It looks like an Egyptian high priest, but look at the writing around the base." Susan struggled to pick it up with one hand. "Gosh, it's heavy, isn't it?" "Solid 24-carat gold, with sapphires and rubies thrown in for good measure," said Blake smugly. "An expensive practical joke, eh, Leo?" Susan held the statue up to the gas lamp to study the writing. "Curious. A kind of Sanskrit, I think, but somehow different. It seems to be mixed with another form of writing I've never seen before." Susan was now in her element. Ancient texts, maybe even an undiscovered language, actually in her hands. "Peculiar shaped base, isn't it? Looks like a horseshoe. Why didn't you show us this before the trip? I could have tried to translate it." "I only got it back from the lab the day before we flew," Blake replied. "Anyway, you were far too busy with what's-his-name." Blake was referring to a noted historian that once called him a playboy archaeologist in a journal. The figure held what appeared to be a crystal ball close to its chest, each hand spread around either side of the sphere, with all fingers intricately interlocking. Blake took hold of the statue. "The lab said that the ball is the purest form of quartz they've come across." "Well, Leo, do you still think it all a bit theatrical?" Leo just answered with a shrug of his shoulders. He was quietly impressed, but not about to let Blake know that. That would spoil his fun. "Don't you think it a bit risky bringing it with you? Surely it would have been safer back at home," said Susan, glancing over at Blake. "I nearly did, but..." Blake stopped in mid-sentence when a gust of wind blew the tent canopy open. "But what?" asked Leo. "A bit weird, really," replied Blake. "I just had the strangest of feelings that it might be needed. Don't know why, though." "Needed?" pressed Leo. Blake withdrew into his own thoughts. Susan sensed something troubling Blake, and indicated to Leo with a shake of her head not to pursue the matter. She stifled a yawn. Blake put the letter and the statue back inside the pouch and returned it to his backpack. "What, no more surprises?" asked Leo. "Let's get some sleep," said Blake. "Got an early start tomorrow." "You know, Ed, I think we may be onto something this time. After all, what better way to attract a curious archaeologist's attention than to have a precious statue on his doorstep with an ambiguous note from a llama in Tibet," said Leo, wriggling back inside his sleeping bag. "Expensive carrot, eh? I hope you're right, Leo," sighed Blake, turning off the gas lamp. He lay there with all manner of thoughts flashing through his head. That was until the rumpers started outside. By the tones of their voices, Long and Sue were engaged in a heated argument. It wasn't uncommon for them to argue, mostly about money and how they carried out their business. But so intense was the argument that Blake stuck his head out of his tent. "Yeah, everything okay?" he shouted. "We're trying to get some sleep in here," mumbled Leo. The driver's tent canopy was flung open, and Wong stormed out and made for the Land Cruiser, where he decided to spend the rest of the night. "Sorry, Leo," apologised Sue, his head poking out of the tent. "It's okay. Not asleep anyway," he shouted. Blake crawled back inside the sleeping bag. Wong and Sue's little set-to sent Blake's mind back to an unforgettable night 3 weeks previous. It was late evening. He was in his study preparing the last of his papers for a lecture the following morning. Outside his apartment, a couple of neighbours were engaged in a heated argument that seemed to last the whole night long. Eventually, the commotion died down and there was silence again. A loud knock at his door startled him, sending all his papers every which way all over the floor. "Oh, who can that be at this time of night?" he thought. "With you in a minute," he shouted, picking up the papers. Looking through the peephole in his door, he could see no one there, except his cat, Tut, sitting on the floor some yards away. "Knocking on doors now, eh, Tut?" said Blake, smiling to himself. Unlocking the door, he could hear faint footsteps on the marble staircase, then the slam of the main doors closing. Looking down, Blake saw Tut rubbing against the pouch that lay in the doorway. The same pouch containing the letter and statue that was to send him on an unforgettable journey to Tibet. Blake was jogged back from his memories by the loud bellowing snore of Leo, which abruptly came to an end when Susan pinched his nose. Outside, the cold night air echoed the faint cry of a lonesome prey falling victim to nocturnal predators. The temperature was beginning to drop. Soon, in a couple of months, the Friendship Highway could well be covered in snow and ice, making travel along its route impossible. The White Plains, as the Tibetans called it, would soon be back. The evening had been full of surprises. Blake's party trick had given everyone plenty food for thought. However, the veil of tiredness began to sweep over them, and one by one they dropped off to sleep. Edgar Blake is a professor of archaeology, although some might dispute that. A tall, lean man of athletic build in his mid-40s with long fair hair and designer stubble. Single and eligible, and no fool, he jokes. Romance has not been number one on his priority list of things to do before you reach 50. He is passionate about mythology and believes that rooted deep within many of the famous myths is an element of truth which he hopes to prove through archaeology. He theorises and has written many articles in which he tries to explain archaeological enigma using mythology. Theorising is one thing, proving it is another, Leo has said on many occasions. Leo Porter, a divorcee and a long-time friend of Blake, is of about the same age. He is a museum curator and historian, and according to Blake, a slave to convention, and jokingly, a cynical agnostic. Leo's books, facts and figures, and Blake's fanciful theories have fueled many a lively debate between the two. Susan Carter is a tall, pretty 33-year-old brunette with 4 college degrees under her belt. A linguist and cryptologist, she first met Blake at an Egyptian seminar some years ago, and has since then assisted Blake on many occasions. Although their relationship has been purely professional, she has high hopes of it leading up to a more personal level. She was surprised when Blake invited her along on this trip. He had never done so before. She didn't even have a valid passport. And then there was the visas, which Blake said he had covered and was already working on. At the time, Blake thought it would be a good idea to omit his title of Professor from his visa application form, thinking it would arouse less suspicion from his Chinese if he just looked like a normal tourist. However, this had the opposite effect. The embassy found out who he was and that he was a professor of archaeology after they had done a search on their computers. They were now very interested in him. Unbeknown to him, Blake's friend at the Chinese embassy was duly arrested for the fast tracking of visas. The Chinese were now curious, especially as the holiday season was drawing to a close. They allowed the visas to be processed and a team of agents assigned to the case in the hope of finding out Blake's true intentions. The Chinese are suspicious about propaganda going in and coming out of Tibet, so much so that they have many agents in all parts of Tibet watching and listening and ready to report. To the Tibetans, this has become a way of life, being careful in what they say and do and who they say it to. End of chapter 1. Well, thank you for listening, and if you liked what you've heard and would like to hear more, please go to my website at www.anthonykeithfineread.com, or you can just click on the link in the post that accompanies this video. Thank you all, bye for now, and I'll see you soon hopefully.